Hey, brother. How are you? As soon as the party is here, we'll bring that mic up and place it where you need to be. Yes. Just watch where we're going.
Good evening and welcome to Jamaica. I am Reverend Patrick O'Connor, pastor of First Presbyterian Church in Jamaica and president of an organized group of citizen leaders called Empowered Queens United for Action and Leadership. We are delighted that you are here this evening. The founders of First Presbyterian Church 351 years ago would be proud to see the congregation they began hosting an event of this kind. Persecuted for their religious faith, they came to this community with the dream that they could fully participate as citizens of their new land, and that they would be respected and their rights protected. Our city today is more complex and wonderful than it was back then, but our tradition continues, in which we demand the same respect for the right of all New Yorkers. This is the third of the Mayoral Candidates Forums that Metro Industrial Areas Foundation is co-hosting with the New York Daily News. Over the past 2 months, a diverse mix of 3,000 New Yorkers have gathered to challenge the people that want to be mayor of our city to tell us what they will do to improve and protect housing, education, and for tonight, public safety. The Daily News has been an early partner with Metro Industrial Areas Foundation in helping us to rebuild our city, safeguard its gains, and challenge New Yorkers and our political leadership to hold each other accountable. It is my pleasure to welcome Arthur Brown, our partner and ally from the New York Daily News, to say a few words.
Good evening. My name is Arthur Brown. I'm the editorial page editor of the New York Daily News.
Good job.
Thank you all for joining us tonight. I also extend thanks to our participants, Mr. Carrion, Mr. de Blasio, Mr. Loda, Mr. Liu, Ms. Quinn, and Bill Thompson, and perhaps to Mr.
Charles is going to open it now.
Thank you for coming to answer the questions as many of you have in our previous 2 forums, and Mr. Carrione, who undergo tonight. I also want to thank the First Presbyterian and New Jerusalem Choir, because I think they were absolutely fantastic. Finally, would you all join me in thanking Reverend O'Connor for welcoming us to the First Presbyterian Church. I'm speaking tonight on behalf of Daily News publisher Mort Zuckerman, Chief Executive Officer Bill Oliver, Editor-in-Chief Colin Myler, Managing Editor Rob Moore, my colleagues on the editorial board, and all members of the Daily News family. Public safety is the foundation upon which New York is built and upon which its future depends most crucially. There are many here who remember what the city once was like, how terrible life was, and how common death was. More than 2 decades have passed since New York suffered 2,245 murders in 1990. So there are many others who don't remember. Many who take for granted a crime rate that's extraordinarily low for urban America, who accept 400 murders as the way things are, who believe that crime will simply stay low or drop further. But that's not necessarily so by any stretch of the imagination. If the trend were to reverse, fear would come back. It would wreak havoc with the economy, with jobs, with the very fabric of life, and victimhood would leave terrible personal scars. At the Daily News, we recently did an analysis. Had crime stayed at the level hit in 1990, New York would have experienced 30,300 more murders than it has. 30,300 more people would have been killed since 1990 had New York not succeeded in bringing crime down. We can't go back to that. We cannot inch in that direction. That's why hearing tonight from these candidates who would be mayor and pressing them for specifics is so vitally important. It is not an exaggeration to say that lives will depend on their judgments and on their actions. So with that sobering thought, I place you now back in the good hands of Reverend O'Connor.
Thank you, Mr. Brown. From the founding of our first affiliate, right here in Queens in 1977, to the present day Metro Industrial Area's foundation leaders in East Brooklyn, the South Bronx, Manhattan, and Queens have taken action to improve public safety. For 36 years, Metro IF leaders have identified crime and drug locations in our communities and worked with the police to shut them down. It's been painstaking, detailed, nitty-gritty, and often dangerous work. We held police officials accountable in the best of times and in the worst of times. And when they did not respond, and we praised and supported them, when they did. We blew the whistle when police over-responded, sometimes in fatal ways, in the killing of Deacon Stephen Kelly of St. Paul's Community Baptist Church many years ago. We know firsthand the anger community feels when one of its own is killed by the police. We have avoided the bureaucratic community advisory structures that thrived during the days of runaway crime and that served as places for people to vent and for the police and politicians to rationalize because they simply did not work. We remember the bad old days when arson and lawlessness ravaged our neighborhoods in the 1970s and 1980s. And when, as Mr. Brown has referred to, 2,245 people were murdered in 1990. As New Yorkers, we're clear on one thing: we never want to go back. And we're grateful that the city has turned around. But we also know that it's turned around because of a strong partnership and results-oriented actions between citizens, the mayor, and police departments. That's what keeps the city moving forward. It is my pleasure this evening to introduce the pastor of St. Paul's Community Baptist Church and the chairperson of Metro Industrial Areas Foundation, the Reverend David K. Brawley.
Good evening, everyone. Good evening. Again, my name is David Keith Brawley. I'm the pastor of the St. Paul Community Baptist Church and chair of East Brooklyn Congregations. I'm tonight to just lay the groundwork before we begin this forum by speaking about the scale of the turnaround when it comes down to public safety in our city. What sets New York apart is that our crime decline is twice as large as the national trend and has lasted twice as long. Crime has decreased across all major crime areas. That's murder, rape, assault, robbery, burglary, larceny, and auto theft. As was stated by Mr. Brown just a few moments ago, there are more than 30,000 people alive today that would have been dead if crime would have continued at its rate in the 1990s. That's more than 50 times the size of all of us who are gathered in this room tonight. Most of those people would have been from our churches, schools, neighborhoods, and some of those people may have been sitting right here tonight. New York benefited from more police due to the increased funding and manpower engineered by Mayor David Dinkins, the City Council Speaker Peter Law, better policing due to the progressive practices of Chief William Bratton under Mayor Giuliani and other mayors and chiefs right up to this present moment. We got fewer excuses and rationalizations. All the things we used to hear about crime in our city, that it couldn't be reduced until the global trade war had ended, and that it couldn't be reduced until our communities became less poor. Instead of excuses, we saw more cops deployed effectively. We saw precinct commanders held accountable. We saw a focus on illegal guns. And we found at times a willingness by police to work with organizations like ours. In spite of these dramatic gains, progress has not been felt evenly and remains fragile. While tourists, diplomats, and many Manhattan businesses receive top-notch safety, our public housing residents face increasing crime rates all the time. New York City public housing is poorly run by Chairman John Reed, ignored by Mayor Bloomberg, and shortchanged by Commissioner Ray Kelly. We expect the next mayor to change all of this. Commissioner Kelly's and Mayor Bloomberg's rapid expansion of stop and frisk is now endangering some of the very games they helped to create. The mayor likes data. So do we. So let me give you some facts about stop and frisk. In 2002, when Commissioner Kelly last took office, officers stopped more than 97,000 New Yorkers, and the city had 587 homicides. In 2011, those numbers were more than 685,000 stop and frisks and 532 homicides. That's nearly 7-fold increase in stop and frisk. In 2012, under pressure, the NYPD decreased the number of stop and frisks to 533,000, and the number of murders still fell to 417. That's a record 50-year low. But in total, since 2002, more than 4 million mostly young Black and Latino men have been stopped, questioned, and frisked. And nearly 90% of them were innocent. Most importantly, the data shows that the biggest crime drop in New York City happened long before 2002. It happened long before stop and frisk became the preferred tactic of our current commissioner and mayor. We believe in the use of any tactic that will make our community safe, including stop and frisk. But stop and frisk has always been one tactic among many, and like all others, has to be used judiciously and effectively. So now, we turn to the candidates who want to be mayor. And guess what? We're going to hold you accountable. We want you to understand that we expect you to have a plan to protect all of the important gains we've experienced over the past 23 years. We want to know how you're going to make our city safe for all the residents and prevent the further erosion of hard-won trust between the police and the community. We are not looking for slogans. We don't want to applaud any simplistic ideas tonight. At the recent education forum, after our debriefing, some of our people felt as though some of you gave us a whole lot of simplistic slogans. If you want our support, if you want our respect, we want to hear your goals, and we need to know how you're going to accomplish them. If you don't have a plan, that's okay. Ask us. But we really hope you do. And we really hope that you came prepared tonight. And with that being said, I want to turn it all over to Mr. Earl Lewis, who's been a phenomenal moderator and done a great job. New York Mayor, let's receive Mr. Earl Lewis. Thank you so much.
Thank you, and thanks for coming out. We're going to keep to a tight schedule the way we have before. I'd like to thank everyone involved in putting this together. A whole lot of hard work went into this. And I'll say to the candidates, thanks for coming out. Good to see everybody. And I just want to reiterate a couple of things. As you've seen in our past forums, there's a plan, right? We kind of want to move from one thing to the next. And we've got a couple of different ways that I'll ask questions. Sometimes I'll ask for a show of hands if it's that lends itself to that kind of a sounding out of your positions. And sometimes I'll ask a couple of you to sort of talk about an issue, just because it was determined in advance, and that might be the best way to sort of work through the issue. I want to say, though, very clearly, we're going to have a special section tonight where we just talk about stop and frisk. So we're going to ask you to reserve your comments about that until we get to that discussion. And we'll give you more than enough time, I think, to really sort of have a discussion about that. And then just to reemphasize something that Reverend Rowley said, folks here do want specific answers, and they want to hear thought out positions, but if you don't have one, it's okay. If you're asked for 3 positions on something and you've only got one, we'd like to hear the one. You don't have to try and fake it. You don't have to try and make a policy on the spot. It would probably be better not to. I need more study. I need more study, or I'm not sure, are perfectly acceptable responses compared to the alternative. And with that, let's get started. Ms. Romey is going to ask our first question. As you all know, we have community questioners, so we've worked very hard on these questions.
Good evening. My name is Romey. I live in Bushwick. I'm a member of St. Thomas Episcopal Church. I'm a volunteer of Duncan James Senior Citizens, and I'm a leader of Brooklyn Congregation. New York is a much safer state. New York is a much safer city today than it was more than 20 years ago. Everybody knows about the contract and the broken window theory. Less people know about the community role in bringing crime down. There are courageous citizens who observe, record, seek police assistance to stop crime activities. And there are some local precinct commanders and officers who work and listen and act. I know in the last 2 years, I worked with the local precinct commanders to shut down 2 drug sites on my block. And some was a social club that was being used for prostitution. Some of these arrests have got guns off of our streets. Citizens working together with precinct commanders have been an important contribution to the city's safety. But there are still parts of the city that remains to be unsafe. My question is, will you drive crime lower than it is today? And what will be your 3 most important strategies?
Thank you, Ms. Romey.
So candidates, the question is, will you drive crime lower than it is today, and what would be your 3 most important strategies? And I'll ask you again, please stop and frisk aside. Let's talk about some other things right now. And I'm going to ask for 1 minute from each of you. And you can start yourselves if anybody wants to jump right in, or I'll select you.
Thank you, Errol. Nice to meet you. Errol, you've done a great job as moderator of these forums. I think they've been extraordinarily good dialogues. Pastor Brawley, thank you for your leadership. Metro IF, Daily News, everyone's been a part of this. I want to thank our host, Pastor O'Connor, and First Presbyterian for having us. First, I want to say the history that was alluded to before. The changes that have happened in the city over the last 20 years happened because of several mayors, several police commissioners, and a lot of good men and women of the NYPD, and a lot of good community residents who fought hard to hold all of them accountable and create that change, and who participate on the front line, such as you, man. And thank you for your leadership and what you achieved in your area. We applaud you. Yes, we can and must continue to drive crime down. I often talk about a tale of 2 cities in New York City today. That is about economic disparity, that is about educational disparity, but it's also about public safety disparity. Because as we've gotten safer and safer, no one in this room, no one in the media can pretend to suggest that that has been easily attributed. Some areas still bear the brunt of our crime problem. And so, three things. And one, I will not say the word stop and frisk. I will say a fundamental, holistic change in the relationship between police and community. Because it has been undermined. It has been a division that has increasingly happened over the last few years that makes it impossible for the police to be as effective as they can be because the connection to the community, the intelligence sharing, the cooperation is not what it needs to be. Second, I would say kind of proactive strategies that we see working, in some cases in New York City, in some cases in other parts of the country. Things like predictive policing that help determine where problem spots might be, including with our youth and in our schools. Focused deterrence or ceasefire efforts, gang intervention efforts that are another version of preventive, proactive policing that are crucial. And third, I would say, to address the issues of our youth by really rededicating ourselves to things like early child education and after school that help to stop a lot of these problems before they begin.
Thank you very much. Yeah, nice talking to you too, Errol. It's pure coincidence, let me tell you something. I want to thank you and all the organizers as well. I think Bill already mentioned all of that, so I'll say thank you to all of you. I especially want to thank my wife Jenny also, because there's 3 times a year that I do not go out, and that's on February 14th, on our anniversary, and on her birthday. And today happens to be her birthday, so I want to thank Jenny. And I thank you for this informed forum. There are very critical questions that we need to address. And crime reduction has to continue to be a top priority in this city. And I'm going to talk about the 3 things that I would do. But I want to say from the outset that it can't just be about driving the numbers down and ignoring some problems in the community, because we have seen too much of that in the drive in Comstat, in the relentless pressure to keep reporting lower and lower and lower numbers. I mean, at some point, it's hard to believe that the numbers are going to get any lower in a city of 8.5 million people. We know of too many instances where you walk into a precinct and nobody wants to take a report. People refuse to identify that problem that actually occurs. So we've got to not sweep the problems under the rug, but we've got to also continue on number 1. I think it's important. It's important that we stop doing that thing that we're going to talk about a little bit later. I believe that's creating a huge amount of division that is actually creating a less safe environment for everybody in the city. Number 2, I believe that we need to restore the police force to the levels of it was 10 years ago. An increase of 5,000 police officers in the city to be paid for through a combination of lowered overtime costs, which are costing the city a couple of $100 million a year at this point, and also a reduction in the number of claims and lawsuits against the city, which has skyrocketed in recent years. We need to have a more balanced police force, one that is working closely with the community, and one that does not face so much immense pressure from artificial reasons. And then the third thing is we need greater economic development. We need to put people back to work. We need to create jobs in the city. When we do that, and we restore some economic recovery, crime will go down. Thank you very much.
Just a second. I wanted to just as a yes/no follow-up and introduce something, because I know a number of you are talking about hiring more cops. We asked the city how much that would cost. They said with benefits and salary, we're talking about $73 million for every 1,000 police. So that 5,000 equates to upwards of $350 million. Okay, just wanted to make sure that that's the number you're talking about.
$72 million will be offset by cost savings from lowered overtime, which is costing a couple $100 million.
Errol?
and lower losses.
Yes.
Mr.
Errol, that number that you got from the city only represents the amount of salary. You add the benefits?
It includes benefits.
It does not, it'd be up to 150.
Joe,
No.
we're not going to disagree over the numbers, but it is about including benefits by 74 million per thousand police officers. Mr. Roman, let me thank you first for your involvement and for being out here tonight and for helping to drive crime down in Bushwick. In a neighborhood, my neighboring neighborhood, at least, I grew up in Bedford-Stuyvesant. So I know exactly what you've gone through over the years. So, hello neighbor, it's good seeing you this evening. And first, let me also thank Reverend Brawley. You have been the point person for these 3 debates or 3 candidate discussions. And let me thank you for your involvement and the Daily News for continuing to bring about and talk about the issues that face the future of New York City. Reverend O'Connor, you have a gorgeous church. And let me again thank you for hosting us. I know, Errol, and I'm sorry, I didn't get the memo, and I realize John probably has a little bit of a leg up in his selection of ties this evening. But Mr. Roman, let me, 3 things, and the first thing, I think that, what we have seen is kind of a turn away from the policeman on the beat, the community policing, where we need to see officers back on the streets who know who's creating the problems, who is it. They know the residents of the neighborhoods. It's not just a phone call, it's not just a call to the precinct of 311. They know the people to talk to find out what's going on in the neighborhood. I think that is a major change we need to see again. Having an officer drive by isn't the same thing as having an officer walk by and speak to the people in the neighborhood, and it builds up that bond and that trust, number 1. Number 2, as we start to look at why, if we look at the problem, so much of it is focused on so many of our young people. Because they have time on their hands. Because there isn't, when I used to go to junior high school 35, after school, I didn't go to 35, but I went there after school at 6 o'clock. Center was open in the evenings where my friends and I could play basketball, could do homework. It was a safe haven to keep us off the streets, and it kept us out of trouble. That type of organization, that type of organized recreation and educational support is important, and we need to create focus there again. Last but not least, and speaking of the third thing, I've advocated for the increase of officers also. And we have not been below 35,000 in the number of police officers in over 30 years. And how do you start to pay for those additional officers? We're about 34,000 officers right now. We need at least to get to 37,000, with 1,000 of those officers going to the 5 highest crime precincts in the city of New York. We want to talk about equity and fairness in driving crime down in every community and keeping crime down. That's important. And ways to pay for that, as we talk about, sure, overtime is one of the ways, civilianization. There are hundreds of officers who sit behind the desk right now and do work that civilians and low-paid civilians should do. That's important. And those numbers are in the hundreds. I'll tell you, I know that the current police commissioner really isn't a fan of civilianization. We need to make sure that those, and at the very least, I would say it's probably somewhere in the 400 to 500 range, and that's probably being conservative of the number of officers who could be out on the streets, followed up by and with their jobs being done by lower paid civilians. There's so many different ways that we can continue to drive crime down, and drive crime down not just in a few neighborhoods, but in many neighborhoods, in all neighborhoods. Because right now, you and I know, and all of us know in this room, that there are people who are scared to go out of their houses again, who are living behind closed doors, who are hearing gunshots in the night, and are scared to come out, and we are not going to tolerate that.
Okay, thank you. And folks, at the risk of seeming rude, and you can blame me for the rudeness, you don't have to thank folks. We love you, and we're glad you're here. The crowd appreciates you. And no one will lose any points on etiquette or politeness. You can blame it all on me. Who's next? I thought Joe wanted to. We'll let Joe go in 15 minutes.
I'm supposed to thank everybody, but I won't be very specific, so thank you overall. And I've been warned that people tweet about when I don't thank, so it's important to get it out. What was mentioned overall by Ms. Romney was what happened in the city of what used to happen in the city when it came to when Comstat first started, and how police precinct captains or commanding officers in each and every precinct got to work with everybody in the community, the senior citizens, the churches. I was part of that. When Commissioner Bratton first started in 1994, part of what he wanted to do was to make sure the community involvement was as solid and as important, and it became a critical part of it. So first and foremost, the answer to the question, do I want to see a drop in crime? Will I work for a drop in crime? Absolutely. It'll be a laser-like focus, because everything that has happened in the last 20 years, and the elimination of fear from that, every good thing has happened in the city of New York. And if you can't eliminate crime, we will all be in a little bit of trouble. So first and foremost, we do need more community involvement, and go back to the strategies that were developed by Bill Bratton. Number two, we have to increase training and sensitivity training for all of our police officers. It is critical that all of our officers, many of whom, some come from the city, some don't come from the city, they come from different communities, they come from different backgrounds, but they need to understand the community in which they serve. That's the most important part. They serve the community, and that's something that we also have to put in. Transparency. You know these Comstat numbers that everybody talks about? We gotta work real hard to find them on the website. You need to go into the communities every month or every quarter and show what's actually happened to crime and where crime is, and it's broken down by precinct, and every precinct council should get that information and work with the local community boards to be able to get that information out there. It is critical that we look at all of the things that we need to do to reduce crime. It all begins with the community and it ends with the community, because that's how it happened from '94 through 2001.
Thank you very much. Again, with the ditto on the not thank you. Ms. Roy, thank you very much for everything you've done, and thank you for your question. And let me just say, I will do everything as mayor that I can to get crime to go down even further, because it really is the foundation from which everything else can kind of leap off of in our city. Let me mention the three areas I would focus on to make that happen. One, I agree with my colleagues. We need to get the number of police officers and other entities, and I'll come back to that, involved in keeping us safe to where they should be. And that's not just a promise I make, to get more resources into the police department, to get the number of police officers up. It's something I've already delivered on. In both 2008 and 2011, when there were attempts to cut back on police classes, my colleagues and I want to thank Jim Gennaro and Leroy Connery and former Councilmember Archer Spigner for being with us. We stood up, we fought back, and we didn't allow those classes to be eliminated, because we have to have more officers out there, particularly now when so many officers have had to be diverted to work on anti-terrorism issues as well. Two, we can't forget the district attorney. It is critically important to make sure that we have enough prosecutors, which is why every year we in the council fight to get money back into the district attorneys, and they should not have to come before the council every year and beg for their funding. But I also want to say we need to remember all the entities that are involved in crime fighting, and the chief medical examiner is a critical part of that. That's why I successfully got the chief medical examiner in the budget process to now be classified not as health, but as law enforcement, which buttresses that office against worse cuts. That means we don't have to wait as long to get DNA results or rape kits done, which is critical if you have been the victim of a crime. So that's one, resources, but understanding the complexity of who really is law enforcement in this city. Two, better coordination. What is one of the hardest crimes to get down in this city? Rape and sexual assault. What is one of the key things that's helped us finally start to make progress? We don't have 5 separate special victims units anymore in this city that don't talk to each other. They're all under one umbrella now in the police department. It used to be that there could be a rape committed in Queens with a similar pattern to one in Manhattan, but we wouldn't know that because they weren't linked up. We need to find every other opportunity like that in the police department and share data and crime patterns. That was a critical step forward. We also need to model some of the work that District Attorney Vance has done in Manhattan. You meet with Simon Vance, he can tell you every known gang leader on a block in a housing authority development, in, you know, a 3 or 4 block area. They're watching those folks, they're monitoring them to see what's going on. And then, as in the case of the 137th Street crew, when they took that crew down, after that type of laser light focus, the DA and the local council member came in with community resources in that neighborhood. So coordination all the way through. The third strategy, better community involvement. What does that mean? It means bridging the divide that's developed with the police and communities through some practices. It also means engaging the community more directly. That's why this year in the budget, we put over $4 million in to expand community-based responses to gun violence. Things like crime interrupters, mental health programs, initiatives we know that can aid the community in their efforts. You know, a couple of years ago, there was graffiti throughout our city. It said, "Stop snitching." It was an attempt to terrify people not to come forward. What did I do? I organized women across the city, and we went out and we covered that graffiti up and painted over it. That's the type of coordination we need. Those are the 3 things I would.
Thank you. Before I go to the next one, John Luke talked about 5,000 additional cops. Bill Thompson talked about, I think, about 3,000 to 4,000 additional cops. How many were you talking
The
about?
number that we're at right now, as of January, is 35,398, a little bit higher than what Billy said. I think minimally we need to set a goal of 37,000, and then we're at that point to see whether we need to add more at that point.
Thank you to the sponsors. Ms. Romy, thank you very much for the work that you have done to make Brooklyn safer and your neighborhood safer. I come at this as someone who grew up in this city, in the city of the 1970s, in a place that had become exceedingly dangerous. People were leaving the city. The South Bronx was depopulated. My family took the journey from Williamsburg to Alphabet City in the Lower East Side to the Bronx. I come at this as a father who is terribly concerned for the safety and security of his 4 children, and I come at this as the former borough president who had a direct working relationship with 12 precinct commanders who visited every morning call at every precinct to talk to the police officers, who worked with South Bronx churches and many of the church organizations who held that community together, obviously through the 1970s and 80s. And in fact, for all the politicians that like to take credit for the turnaround of our city and the turnaround of places like the South Bronx, it was in fact, Reverends, the faith communities in our city that held those communities together, and it was not necessarily the politicians who did that, even though we like to take so much credit for it. All of this led me to the 3 policies. Yes. I think, one, ladies and gentlemen, we need to get illegal guns off our city streets. We need to restore a community policing model that gets the police officers out of the squad cars and walking the residential districts and the commercial districts of our city. And that requires additional police officers. We're not going to see the police officers walking up to young people and having a conversation like I used to have in my neighborhood. We're going to see them, we're going to continue to see them jumping out of cars and startling and jumping into a situation which I think creates a very difficult environment and a very difficult, tense relationship with the police department. So we need to heal that relationship. But I think there's a third thing here that it doesn't go so much to community policing, but it goes to who we are as a city of New York. And we have to stay firmly ensconced, firmly focused on fighting global terrorism. Because it is all for naught if the enemies of freedom come to this city or any other American city and figure out a way to destroy us. So we need to stay focused on that. We need to protect New York for everyone.
Mr. Gatsby. I guess I'm the leader. I grew up on 135th Street. In the 1950s and 1960s, it wasn't so bad. It did get bad in the 1970s. And I believe in more cops in the streets. I believe in 21st century cop. I believe a cop that's going to be on the streets that has the proper communications device, has the proper informational device, and is mobile. You know, a cop walking around and can't cover enough ground doesn't do us any good. You got to put them either on a bicycle or tricycle or one of those. We've got to get more of them so that we need them to cover. Okay, let's go out. We'll make one more pass. You know, the object is to be able to get them around to more blocks in our neighborhoods. Get them around, not to be stuck on one street. I think we can create more cops on the street by getting more civilians in the back room, doing back room projects in the precincts. We need to mobilize them and to teach them how to deal with communities. And what I believe in is that we have to have community officers that go into every community, every church, every synagogue, and deal with the people and be able to have monthly meetings to be able to communicate. Communications is the most important thing. Communications, mobility, more people on the streets, more cops on the streets that are mobile, and more civilians in the back room. We can build up the civilian force and transfer the police from inside the precincts to the streets.
Okay, very good. And Ms. Romy, you heard quite a lot of different proposals from the different candidates. I'm wondering if you think you've got more clarity about your question.
Yes, I have.
Turn it on. Oh, get that microphone on.
Something. Whoever be the mayor, I'm going to hold you accountable to your promise. Okay? I'm looking for you.
Good evening. My name is Richard Gibbs. I'm a member of Our Lady of Light Roman Catholic Church in St. Albans. I'm also a leader in Equal. I'm a former police officer and a retired court officer. And because of this, I do understand how dangerous it is for the illegal gun crimes for our police officers, law enforcement, and also for our citizens. And so New York State has some of the toughest gun laws in the nation, and yet illegally purchased firearms continue to be a favorite tool of violent criminals. Everyone is waiting for the U.S. Congress to do something, but the NYPD, as one of the nation's largest purchasers of firearms, could start to create change right now. My question is, as mayor, will you lead the NYPD and other city law enforcement agencies to push firearm manufacturers to end sales to dealers whose guns are frequently used in crimes in New York City?
Let me ask for a show of hands. Who thinks that is a good idea? Who thinks that's something they would do as mayor?
Go back to the moderator.
I just don't, I think we're going to be fighting the world is, I believe in doing things that are realistic and you can accomplish it. To try to take on the world, to take on the whole country, it's not going to happen.
Okay, I'm going to ask John Luke and Joe Loda to give us 1 minute on why you think this idea. Tell us a little bit of your thinking. You can start.
I think that, when you see a situation where little kids are attacking their own school, that has sent the nation into an outrage, and public opinion has really turned the tide. It's enabling the president, it's enabling Congress to move quickly on gun control. But we can go to the source of these guns also. And in New York City, we leverage off of the billions of dollars of pension funds that we have. We have, through the teachers' pension fund, divested from all of the gun manufacturers so that we're not only stocked in any more of these companies that make things to kill people. We're working on the next pension fund, the New York City Employee Retirement Fund, and I want to thank Bill de Blasio, who's a trustee of that with me, because we're going to have that fund that gets from gun manufacturers also. The more business pressure these companies feel to stop making these things that really have nothing to do with the Second Amendment, but have everything to do with killing other people, the better off we are all going to be, the more safe we are all going to be in New York City and everywhere else in the country.
Okay.
But in New York City, let me just say, we also need to expand the gun buyback programs. We pay about $200 a gun, and yet, well, we're going to talk about that.
Thanks, Earl. Thanks, Officer Gibbs. I appreciate it. Your idea is a very good idea because New York City should use its purchasing power, not just on the handguns, but also on the ammunition. Significantly more on the ammunition than it is on the handguns because there's a lot more that can be done in that area with identification on each and every one of the bullets. That being said, we have used the purchasing power of New York City. John Lewis said on the pension side, but we've also done it in our MWBE programs where we were able to actually, use our purchasing power to achieve a social end or an economic end. What I think is really important, John is right in a sense that it's going to be very, very difficult to do, but that's what mayors are elected to do. They're elected to do difficult things, and that's what we should do. We should try, and we should try to move forward and see if we can change the gun manufacturers as well as the ammunition manufacturers. That's what we should do, and that's what we should all do as mayor.
That also clean sleep, Officer Gibbs.
Okay, I just wanted to say that there's no such thing as an insurmountable problem. You find out what the problem is, and then you work piece by piece on the solution. Thank you.
What is it?
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Mayoral, and I lived in the Melrose houses in the South Bronx for 7 years. I'm a member of Immaculate Conception Church and a leader in South Bronx churches. The other day, a woman was attacked in her elevator in a nearby NYCHA development. That could have been me. Getting into an elevator shouldn't be unsafe, but it often is if you live in New York City public housing. These days, crime is often indoors. It is in the lobbies, in the corridors, in the elevators of NYCHA where more than 600,000 New Yorkers live. New York City public housing is the only place where major crime has gone up by almost 15%. In my building and in too many others, windows, front doors, and intercoms remain broken. Stairwells and courtyards are frequently dark, and police patrols are often sporadic. I'm tired of risking my safety and life when I go home. I want to know, in your first year, will you make improving security in NYCHA a priority? And what are the 2 or 3 specific things you will do to accomplish this?
We first, Mr. Thompson, 2 or 3 specific things, Max.
The first thing, and Ms. Baez, thank you for being here this evening. You know, that is the first thing to do. And day one, we need a different structure at the Housing Authority. We need to get rid of the board that exists right now and the salaries that are paid. We need to put a chairman who's responsible directly to the mayor and have a board of individuals made up of people who understand housing, who understand security, who live in the Housing Authority developments across the city of New York. That's the first step. Number 2, there's money, and one of the things that is outrageous, there's money, number 1, that has been there for security and the credit given to the city council for approving money over the years that sits there for security cameras that hasn't been used. We need to use that money. There's money that's been sitting there for repairs within the Housing Authority. Repair the doors, repair the locks, make sure that the courtyards are well lit. There's money there for it. It hasn't been used. So those things are first steps. And last but not least, if we're looking at security in other buildings, there's somebody at the front door. There's somebody at the front who's watching people coming in, watching people leave, knows who's there. Why don't we do that in the Housing Authority also? And treat the tenants and the residents of the Housing Authority with the respect that they're entitled to. Those are things that provide for safety. And they'll make sure that they get their fair share. I get asked all the time. The people of the Housing Authority, there's an amount of money that is sent from the Housing Authority to the city of New York for police protection. There's an amount that's paid each and every year that comes out. That's a leftover from the days of the federal government providing lots of money to the city of New York. Why are we taking that money out of the Housing Authority? We could leave that there and provide for more secure facilities, as well as making sure the police pay the attention to the Housing Authority developments that they need to.
And Bill, because it was a time-sensitive question, those are priorities for your first year in office?
I would say that the first thing right off the bat, change the structure of the Housing Authority, make me accountable. I want to be accountable for increasing safety in the Housing Authority as the mayor of the city of New York. That's step number 1.
Okay.
Maribel, thank you very much. And I want to say that in the first year, as one of the highest priorities, we need to focus like a laser beam on the safety and security of the 600,000 New Yorkers who live in the New York City Housing Authority. I speak from the point of view of somebody who has lived in the Housing Authority. We lived in the East River houses by the FDR Drive on the Lower East Side. I still remember the address and the exact window I used to peek out of to the East River. I also come at this as someone who has had the experience of having worked with the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, and I will tell you, it is not entirely unique to New York. We have a lot of broken housing authorities across the country. So the mayor of the city of New York is going to have to hold this authority accountable for delivering and unfortunately for historically underperforming for those 600,000 New Yorkers. But let me say what the strategy ought to be. Drive-up policing doesn't work because it pushes crime inside buildings and homes. What we need is to restore the relationship between the police and the community. What we did in the Bronx, working very hard to try to make the hallways and elevators and stairwells and rooftops safe, we worked with this Clean Halls program. Now, Clean Halls program doesn't work by itself where police officers are doing this all on their own. It's in partnership with tenant associations, with tenant leaders, with community leaders, with young people in those buildings so that we reestablish a communicative trust relationship with our #1 customer in New York City. So I think that has broken down, and we're seeing that manifestation in so many ways. And it goes back, unfortunately, to resources, to the fact that we are 6,000 fewer officers in the last 10 years. It's not going to work until we restore the resources in the ranks of the police.
And you weren't here for our housing panel, but one of the things that came up very prominently was restructuring the board, the management of NYCHA. Do you have a position on that?
You know what, my approach to management is that when something is broken and not working, like our education system, and I know you had an education for it, you need to turn it upside down and fix it. So we need to, the New York City Housing Authority management structure and board needs a makeover, and I would make it a high priority.
Earl, can I make a comment? Yeah, just a second. We're going to do some very, very short comments, and this is the real 60 seconds. So, Christine Quinn and John Hanson.
Let's make this a citywide approach. Let's bring in a task force of every agency to focus on NYCHA and report back. Why aren't we talking to the Department of Transportation about the lights on every block that surrounds NYCHA? We need a listing of every entity near a NYCHA development that has criminal activity. The parks that are near NYCHA, Parks Department needs to be part of this. We need to make fixing NYCHA and making it safer, yes, about NYCHA. Yes, about the police department, but about every city agency that in some way touches NYCHA, which is just about every city agency. And that type of a task force focus should be set up. They should report to the first deputy mayor, to the mayor, and those reports out to the public. This is an enormous problem. It is unacceptable, the level of crime in NYCHA. Let's make everyone be part of the solution, because think about all the different city agencies that interact with NYCHA. Parks are the trees around the lights near developments overgrown and making your block darker, which adds to crime. There's a many more hands we can bring on deck. That's what I would do, that type of coordination.
Thank you. John.
Bottom line, in my discussions with the Police Foundation and Brandon Kelly, Commissioner, 20% of the city's crimes happen in 325 buildings. Let's do what we did to the subway system. Enough of all the complicated things. Let's put a police officer in every one of those buildings. If we need 4 officers to cover the shift, that's only 1,200, 1,400, 1,500 police officers. And if you can get rid of 20% of the city crimes with a few thousand officers, let's just do it and get it done.
Harold, just a quick point. I think we need to realize how profoundly different the approach to NYCHA has to be going forward. I believe that for Michael Bloomberg, like there's a cloak of invisibility around NYCHA. And he does not take responsibility for public housing. He doesn't talk about public housing. He doesn't make it a priority. And if we're going to actually achieve safety in public housing, and Maribel, what you said about knowing that the elevator you're getting into, that knowing that your everyday life may not be safe. It begins with a mayor saying NYCHA is his responsibility. We talk about mayoral control of education. How about mayoral responsibility for NYCHA front and center? Over 500,000 New Yorkers who depend on things like police who actually know NYCHA residents. Not just coming in and sweeping through and then you never see them again. But police who develop relationships with residents of each development, with tenant leaders, with tenant patrol members, and making it the kind of priority that actually could lead to safety. But that's not going to happen if the next mayor doesn't think of NYCHA as one of the first things to focus on.
Thank you. Ms. Baez, did you get some clarity on your question?
I was just wondering, in the first year, will you have a one-on-one with the chairman of NYCHA and how them accountable?
In my first year, we'll take care of all of those buildings because the money is in place. We've got $1 billion sitting there, unused, when we could be fixing every single elevator, fixing the door locks every time it breaks, and making sure all of the systems are in place to keep people
In
safe.
my first month, we have a police officer in every building.
Thank you.
Ready to go, thank you.
What's the matter with it? Where are you going, Matt? Keep the camera going.
My name is Reverend David Haber. I'm the pastor of Church for All Nations Lutheran Church in Manhattan and a leader in Manhattan Together. There's no question that the city is safer now than when Commissioner Kelly came in to take the position. But he's not perfect. My question is simply this. Would you keep Commissioner Kelly? Yes or no?
Let's see what we
I think he definitely needs to go, but he needs to be an advisor to the next person, certainly.
Let me ask Trustee Quinn to explain why she would keep him, and we'll ask Councilman why he would not.
I have long said that I think Ray Kelly has been an outstanding police commissioner. He's taken crime down. He's taken crime down to levels lower than any of us could ever have imagined was possible. And in particular areas like hate crimes and domestic violence and rape and sexual assault, he's brought new and inclusive strategies to the table that have helped take those categories that are so hard head in the right direction. Now look, thinking somebody is good at a job and should stay at a job doesn't mean I agree with them about everything.
Where would you say you fell short?
Pardon?
Where would you say you fell short?
I think am I allowed to say the 3 words we're talking about later? I think the area of stop, question, and frisk, the police commissioner has over-relied massively on stop, question, and frisk, and the numbers are unacceptably high, are not yielding results, and are in fact driving communities apart, which makes the city less safe. But when I'm mayor, the police commissioner, Kelly is my police commissioner, or anybody else, they're going to work for me. And when I direct them to use stop, question, and frisk only when necessary, in a focus that's based on the quality of the stop, not the quantity of the stop, that is going to happen. And I believe we'll see Ray Kelly as an even better police commissioner than one that he's been through. I just don't think for people to work together, you have to agree on every single thing.
Fair enough.
I'm going to say something colloquial, and I don't say it with any disrespect to Ray Kelly, but I think it's done a lot to serve this city. But I think it's a truism we all know. You can't teach an old dog new tricks. I think it is unbelievable that Ray Kelly is truly going to reform stop and frisk in the way we need. He is someone who has served the city in many noble ways, but he's also been the architect of the overuse of stop and frisk that has created the division between city and community.
What's the qualities you look for in a replacement?
I think we need an absolute devotion to community policing. I think, in fact, when Mayor Bloomberg came in, and I have my differences with the mayor, but you know, there's someone I have even more differences with named Rudy Giuliani, no disrespect, though. And Mayor Bloomberg did some substantial things to heal the wounds left by Giuliani and help to bring police and community together, and then put it in reverse with Commissioner Kelly by turning to stop and frisk more and more and more and ignoring the huge collateral damage it was causing. And I think what we need is not just a commissioner with a true devotion to community policing, to understanding that all the success we've made is with community residents, with community leaders, with community patrols, and with the men and women of the NYPD, not just because of the commissioner, but second, we need something that guarantees checks and balances on any commissioner. We need a strong inspector general to make sure we never again see stop and frisk get out of line and poison the relationship between police and community.
This is a very important position in the city, and we hear what you have to say, and we will hold you accountable.
Thank you.
The answer is no. We're gonna give you a chance to talk about it in just a second.
Candidates, I have a question for all of you. Just by a show of hands, how many of you did stop and frisk? Well, I have. At least 20 times. Even coming out of church after Bible study at that point. So unfortunately, I am an expert at stop and frisk. My name is Brandon Gibson, and I am a leader at Hope Christian Center and in East Brooklyn Congregation. cannot be unstopped or unfrisked. I know that the use of stop and frisk in some situations is needed, warranted, and maybe even constitutional. I respect the difficulties and the dangers of good police work. At the same time, I expect the police department to respect the data that show that stop and frisk has been overused. So, my question tonight is simple. What is your best estimate of how important the NYPD's tactic of stopping, questioning, and frisking people has been in reducing crime?
Okay, now candidates, we're going to do something a little different here. I'm going to allow you all to talk. And I'm not going to sort of call on anybody, and we'll only manage the time if it looks like someone's trying to hog it. But I'll invite you all to sort of share some of your thinking on this and to call attention to where you think we've gone right or wrong. And we can start with you, John.
Well, thank you. I think the answer to the question is, it hasn't been part of the impact. I think crime has been reduced despite the overwhelming use of stop and frisk. Because as I said before, the amount of division that this tactic has created between communities and the police has made it less safe for everybody. And that's why I believe that stop and frisk has to be abolished. And that's what I believe. Now, let me say that here and then, and I've said this many times, when you read about 700,000 people being stopped and frisked in a city, almost all of whom have done nothing wrong, you'd be thinking that you're reading about some third world dictatorship. Not in America, and certainly not here in New York City. You add to that the fact that almost everybody being stopped and frisked, almost all of whom have done nothing wrong, is black or brown. How can you deny that there's racial profiling going on? In fact, this is the largest system of racial profiling going on anywhere in the United States of America. Let's talk about having the police talk with people like Ms. Mobley, Ms. Romey, Ms. Romey, who she knows exactly where the drug dens are on her block, in her neighborhood. And that's true of every single community. The police just simply ask the people who live in those communities and who are recognized leaders in the communities where the hotspots are. They should focus their deterrent efforts on those elements 24/7. That will make it safer for everybody. You then have an issue of an increasing number of lawsuits and claims against the city, all the while when stop and frisk has been going up dramatically. There's a cost. There's a cost in human lives. There's a cost in the humiliation that young black and brown men have to suffer when they get stopped and frisked. And ultimately, there's the cost of taxpayers. We can do better, and we will do better.
Brandon, I'm one of the people who does agree with John. I think stop and frisk should not be abolished, but it does need to be controlled. Let me ask you one question. In the 20 stop, question, and frisk that you were part of, did you ever get an explanation in any one of those 20 times? Maybe one or two.
I've never been questioned. I don't even stop.
Then training has become a big problem because all police officers are taught in the police academy and updated quite frequently. And the law is actually called stop, question, and frisk at the state level. They have to do that. But I'll go one step further. I do believe that an officer must also tell you why. If they tell you why, there'll be an explanation as to exactly why you stop. Whether or not there was a crime in that area and you might have fit the description, or there was an bulge under his eye that might have looked like a gang gun. Stop and frisk has been around for hundreds of thousands of years. We cannot abolish it. We need to control it. We need to regulate it. We need to train everyone how to use it. Most importantly, police officers, going back to the sensitivity training that I talked about earlier, it's going to be very, very important that they understand that the African American and the Latino communities feel like they're besieged by this. We absolutely need to make sure that the cops are properly
legislative senses, folks want detail. So let's look at the facts, the details here, right? As crime has gone down, South Question and frisk, and they don't correlate. When South Question and frisk has peaked, crime has not been plummeting at the same level. The real decrease in crime in the Bloomberg administration happened when South Question and frisk was much, much lower. So is it important? Not an opinion, it's the facts. It is not a critical strategy in bringing crime down. The data shows that itself. And beyond that, the number of guns or weapons or significant contraband that are found in these stops is statistically insignificant at this moment in time. So the data shows it is not a critical component to keeping our city safe. Now, I wouldn't abolish it. We want to leave it as a tool that can be used when it is necessary, but we need to have real structure around this practice, a type of structure that doesn't let the numbers skyrocket like they have, and that skyrocketing has dragged our communities and our police apart from each other, which will make us less safe. That's why next month the council will pass into law legislation creating real monitoring, what people refer to as Inspector General, into law in the city of New York, and we will continue even after doing that to negotiate around the other aspects of the Community Safety Act, because we can't have a practice like this go unchecked. We can't have other practices in the police department go unchecked. Almost every other city agency has a monitoring Inspector General function with subpoena power. That's what we'll have with the police department when we pass that next month.
I have a follow-up for you. With or without an Inspector General, the buck stops at the mayor's desk.
Absolutely.
How do you control it? I mean, do you tell the police commissioner we don't want to see more than 10,000 a month? I mean, how do you do that?
You tell the police commissioner, one, that you need to make sure you're, as it is, training police officers that these stops are done in a constitutional context. Two, as a police commissioner, you ask to see the data from ComStat, not just the data on the number, but broken down by officer, broken down by what they've yielded. And if the stops aren't yielding actions that keep our community safe, you instruct the police commissioner to direct his or her tactics to ones that will yield data that we know are keeping us safe. The police department nowadays is all about data. It's not that complicated. We're not seeing a correlation between this tactic and keeping our city safe at all. Redirect to where tactics can keep people safe.
Brandon, for years, as we looked at stop and frisk continue to escalate. And in 2011, there's an almost hit 700,000. Continue to say, is stop and frisk a useful tool? Yes, it is being misused and abused. It is as simple as that. And you continue to try it, whether you acknowledge or not, things don't happen on their own. We've looked at the escalation of stop and frisk, as you point out, from almost 100,000 in 2002 to almost 700,000 in 2011. It's as you start to tie it to performance indicators, where people are being monitored, and police officers are being attention to how many stop and frisk they do. It is being paid attention to. It is being misused. When you look at police officers and talk to officers who will sit there and say, you know something? There's an art to being a police officer. The art of being a police officer is being taken away because their discretion to stop who they know they should and not stop a certain amount of people. When that's being taken away from them, there's something wrong. When I have to sit and talk to my 15-year-old, and I've talked about it before, when I talk to my 15-year-old about what to do if you're stopped, what should you do? And then I realize, wait a second, he doesn't have proper identification. Wait a minute. Why does he have to have proper identification at 15? Why do I have to have that conversation with him about what to do? And in the end, he asked the correct question. He asked the question that people all across the city of New York should be asking. And he's looking and he said, hey, Bill, if I'm not doing anything wrong, why would I be stopped? Why would I be stopped? And what that is, you're a young black man who lives in Harlem and there's a good chance of doing stopped. There's something wrong with that. So this needs to be, it doesn't need to be tied to performance indicators. If we stop that, then things start to change, and stop and frisk is used as it was intended to, not the way it's being misused and abused right now.
Yeah, Errol, and Brandon, clearly this is broken. We have miserably failed in the application of what is one of the many tools that the police department has for crime fighting. When you asked the question at the beginning, you said, have any of you been stopped and frisked? I didn't raise my hand because when I got stopped and questioned by the police, two very important moments in my life that I still remember today, one on 110th Street, and I think it was in the newspapers. I jumped the turnstile and the cop was there. I was 13 years old. I was going to play basketball on 116th Street. I got the letter to the house. My parents disciplined me very severely because I shamed the family name. The second time was when I was at East River Park, and as kids do, we were horsing around, and there's an amphitheater there, and it said no trespassing, and we trespassed. We jumped in, we were playing horsing around, and guess what? Just in case anybody thinks I'm a saint, and guess what? When I jumped back over that fence, there was a police officer there. He was hiding very smartly. He caught me, and he gave me a good talking to. Now, that relationship that existed of communication is the other side of the tool. Unfortunately, we are data-driven, numbers-driven, pushing these officers to make these stops, but the data bears out the truth. 90% of the stops don't yield anything. And in fact, as the stops have gone up, crime has gone down in our city. So the real tool here is to stop, question, frisk, and respect. Respect. The element of respect has broken down. And respect is the most important element we have in this free democratic society. It has to be restored. We have to respect the job of the police officer, we have to respect the young people in our community, and here's another element to this. Why are so many of the young people that are stopped and frisked hanging out in the streets? Because they don't have options. Because we have failed our young people to give them the kinds of productive activities that even I had playing basketball at the PAL and other sports activities. We need to ensure that we fill these kids' lives with options and opportunities. We need to prepare them for life so that they make smart decisions, and we need to stop misapplying this failed policy, this failed tactic that is being misused at the moment.
Well, you know, a lot of the politicians on this panel will tell you what you want to hear. I'm going to give you some numbers. Detroit, 54 deaths out of every 100,000 people. Philadelphia, 22 deaths out of every 100,000 people. Chicago, which is a disaster area, 19 deaths out of every 100,000 people. New York, 5 out of 100,000. God bless our police department.
There is absolutely no correlation.
Can I finish? Please don't interrupt. Thank you. But our stop and frisk policy is broken, and it's got to be fixed. And I correlate it to a baseball player. If a baseball player, listen to it. If a baseball player goes up and can swing his bat as many times as he wants, it doesn't mean anything. I think every officer should be rated. If you have an officer that has a 0.00 batting average, he should not be allowed to stop and frisk. Only the ones that have the capability of knowing, that have the capability, you might not like it, but I want to keep our city safe. You know, the people in your neighborhoods that are older than you want to keep the people safe. They want to be safe. They don't want guns flying around. I'll tell you one other thing. My assistant that I drive around was a retired police officer. And he'll tell you, and he told me in the car on the way here, and these are the facts, that because people that are afraid that they're going to be stopped and frisked, they leave their guns home. Okay? You want the truth? I give you the truth. You want to hear what you want to hear? Thank you.
I don't have any guns.
Not sure I followed that reasoning. 2 weeks in a row. Brandon, first of all, what you described is so fundamentally unacceptable. You are a leader. You are a law-abiding citizen. Any parent in this room would wish for a child who grew up like you, becomes involved in the community, tries to make life better. And what have you gotten in return for your goodness, but you've been stopped 20 times, treated like you did something wrong? This is a path that simply isn't sustainable for the future of the city. We need to send a message to every young man of color that they are beloved, they are valuable, they are our future. You can't do that if you're constantly treating people as suspects. And if 90% of those who are law-abiding, this is what kills me about this. Every parent in this room can relate to it. We want our children to take the right path, and we want to reward them when they take the right path. And we worry about it every day as parents. And we want the police to be part of rewarding and supporting our youth to take the right path, not in fact standing in the way of what we're trying to achieve. So we're at this week, since the Bloomberg years began, our 5 millionth stop, which is an astounding and unacceptable figure. It's an indicator of the fact, not only do we need a new police commissioner, we need a whole new approach. And why I talked about Inspector General is, we should never have gotten to 5 million stops without us being consulted. Because we didn't vote on that. We weren't part of that discussion. There was no oversight that stopped it from happening. And an Inspector General with power, with teeth, with subpoena power, with an independent budget, could make all the difference in making sure that a police policy that is counterproductive gets stopped before it does too much damage. But where we need to go is bring this number down, stop putting a quota system on our police, which is what's happening to them, which doesn't help, I'll finish, which doesn't help the individual officer, the many, many good men and women of the NYPD. It doesn't help them to do their job, to work with the community, to be partners with the community when they're forced into a quota system that values the most stops as opposed to the most cooperation and the most success working with the community. Those are the kind of changes we need.
Okay. Now, I gotta say this, there's no numerical or statistical correlation that justifies stop and frisk. None of the numbers bear this out. But it's more than just about the numbers, all right? This is about deep humiliation. People who support stop and frisk don't understand how humiliating it is. It is not about people with bulges in their pockets. It is not about people who hop fences. It is about people who are just walking along, to and from school, to and from home, sometimes to their girlfriend. For absolutely no reason, and 9 out of 10 of these cases, they've done absolutely nothing wrong. Bill, I have to say this. Every time you talk about your 15-year-old, I feel terrible. I feel terrible that he has to live in a city like this, and a young man like your son would have to go through the potential of being stopped in prison and being instructed by his dad what to do if he has some kind of problem. Bill, I want you to join me because I feel lonely.
John, and I appreciate your comment. At the same point, no, I'm the one who has to worry about my son being stopped and frisked. I'm the one who has to worry about my son being shot in the street in the air. I'm the one who has to worry. Because when I grew up, it was a very different situation. I'm concerned about about my son also being shot by somebody who's a member of a gang in the streets. I'm worried about my son being mugged in the street of New York City. And at the same point, I don't have to sacrifice his constitutional rights to make sure he is safe. I don't have to sacrifice. I can have them both. So the truth is, you know something? You and I disagree on that fundamentally. We have a disagreement. At the same point, we both want to see things used and done correctly in the city of New York. That is the thing between the two of us. We agree on that.
I want to thank you all for your discussion. I'm going to ask a question of Bill de Blasio, because he mentioned something, and Christine Quinn also mentioned it. There's a lot of talk these days about an inspector general as an add-on to the police department. And, you know, using a very reliable source, the Daily News, it was not read recently, that pointed out that the following agencies currently have oversight of one type or another of the NYPD. The 5 district attorneys, the 2 U.S. attorneys, the Civilian Complaint Review Board, which has subpoena power, and disciplined over 200 cops in 2011, investigating 6,000 complaints. The Attorney General of the United States, the Civil Rights Division, has some oversight. The Department of Investigation, the Commission to Combat Police Corruption, which was created in 1995, it also has subpoena power. And last but not least, the Internal Affairs Bureau that has 700 cops on staff. Why would we need yet another oversight level?
Well, I have 2 things. That one, because look what we're describing tonight. None of those theoretical layers of oversight stopped the massive overuse of stop and frisk, which poisoned the relationship between police and community. There was no oversight on a policy level to stop a very bad trend from happening. Second, you mentioned Civilian Complaint Review Board. It's a tragedy that in the 20 years since the CCRB was created, it had its power taken away, it had its role taken away to the point that it could not be the kind of layer of oversight we needed to help make the police department better. So that tale of what happened to the CCRB, of how it was diminished over the years, and this is another area where I respectfully disagree with Commissioner Kelly, who has not been willing to empower the CCRB. That is an example of why the layers we have now simply aren't working. We not only need an Inspector General, we need an Inspector General with subpoena power, an independent budget, and real teeth.
Do you agree with that?
If you look at all of those layers, the vast majority of them are focused on individual officers' activities, not policies and practices within the police department as a whole. And if those entities in all their different ways were actually looking at broader police department issues, we wouldn't have Mr. Gibson standing here telling us he was stopped 20 times, one time leaving Bible class, and in none of those stops was he ever even questioned. It went right from stop to frisk. So when you can have a lot of entities, but if they're not getting the job done, then more is needed. And from what we've heard tonight, in a very personal and painful way, and unfortunately we all have heard it in many, many neighborhoods, in every borough in the city, we need more. Now, in addition to that, it really is significant that the other entities are about what individual police officers do. You look at most of the other large law enforcement entities out there, particularly ones on the federal level, they have these type of monitoring functions to look at policies and practices, to look at trends within an organization that is a law enforcement organization, because at times just picking out officers when you have over 35,000 isn't going to get the kind of systemic change we need. And what we need right now isn't to change an officer here, an officer there, an officer in the other precinct. It's systemic change within the entire police department, and that is why we need this additional monitoring entity with subpoena power, and that is going to happen when the law is passed by the council.
You're looking skeptical, Joe.
Can I ask a question?
Inspector General or not?
I'm not in favor of the Inspector General. As the Daily News editorial board talked about the number of oversight, one of the issues here is about leadership. The next mayor needs to change the way stop and frisk works. The next mayor, with his or her police commissioner, needs to determine that strategy. And then it's incumbent upon the city council to have its hearing process, and it's incumbent upon, if they come across something, to go to the U.S. attorney, to go to the district attorneys, who have significant subpoena power, to actually look at this. I think building another bureaucracy on top of this problem that we have on stop and frisk is not the right answer. The right answer is leadership. The right answer is getting a new person in there and dealing with it.
Okay, we took a little more time than expected, but Mr. Gibson.
I'll just close this. It seems less like we need to add another organization and more like we need to add or have a mayor that's actually going to hold the police department accountable for what they do or what they don't do, as opposed to having someone else that the mayor can pass it up to. Because the last time I checked, the mayor has authority over the police department, and he has the power to hold the commissioner accountable.
The best case scenario is you have a mayor who holds a police commissioner accountable. But you want to have a structure in place so if you don't have that mayor, people have recourse. You really do want to have both the structure that's there if it's needed, but first and foremost, a mayor who says this is how
We're going to follow what happens with the Community Safety Act. And I want to thank you all and thank you, Mr. Gibson, for a great discussion. I want to make sure we round out our discussion. I'm going to do a couple of show of hands and questions, and then we've got one last question from a community resident. Who believes in a residency requirement for police officers? You have to live in New York City, even if it's only for new hires. Residency requirement, who's not in favor of a residency requirement? Excuse me? Either going forward or for right now, for the NYPD. Who's in favor? I'm sorry. Who's in favor of a residency requirement? You must live in New York City, new hires, for new hires, okay? And who's not in favor of that? Okay. Let's see if we can do this one briefly. I know it's a big question. It's a big question, but we could do a whole forum on it, obviously. But and I'm going to just make this sort of a factual question. Do you believe? Who here believes that the NYPD has spied on Muslims in a way that is or could be unconstitutional, could be illegal? Who thinks that there's something maybe wrong going on with the surveillance of Muslim communities? Okay, now
Can I say something about it real quick?
No, who's convinced that it is, whether it's a good idea or not, that it is a constitutional and legal exercise of police power?
And Inspector General would help to guarantee it's done right going forward.
Absolutely.
Of course.
How can you spy on people just on the basis of the religion they observe? I just don't understand.
Okay. Kadeem, you're up.
My name is Kadeem Mullins. I'm a sophomore at Andrew Jackson High School, and I'm a member of First Presbyterian Church in Jamaica. 2 months ago, while I was heading from school to a church academic program, I was assaulted and robbed by 5 people. Not only were no police around to prevent it, when I got here to church and reported it, police did not come for half an hour and seemed to take very little action when they did come. Too many other students are victims of crime, and it has to stop. One solution that has helped to prevent such crimes has been to increase police patrol along corridors as students walk to and from school. My question is, will you commit to improving safe corridors for students? And if the answer involves more patrol, where specifically will you get them from?
Let's start with a show of hands. Who will commit to improving safe corridors for students? Okay. All right. And where specifically are you going to get the resources to do this? Because there are a lot of schools, there are a lot of students, and there are a lot of corridors, most of which, or many of which, are not being patrolled, which is the basis of the question. Let's start with you, Mr. Carrigan.
I come at this as a dad whose 4 kids went to New York City public schools. 2 of them are still there. One of them is in university now, successfully graduated, was prepared. My daughter is working with me. I have 2 kids that still take the bus and subway to school every single day. So I'm terribly concerned about their safety and making sure that they come to and fro securely between home and school. Let me just say, we are taking 1,000 police officers, rightfully, I believe, but we're taking 1,000 police officers and transferring them to Ground Zero. When Freedom Tower is done, we're going to add 1,000 officers there. There are hundreds of officers that we take from the precincts of the city of New York and redeploy them in important places in our city. What we need to do, and you asked about how do we get there, we've got to get those 6,000 officers, or however many we can, restored to the precincts of the city. When I was borough president, I worked very, very closely with each precinct commander, and we talked about a deployment strategy. I was telling Joe Loda earlier that we targeted places like a hot sheet motel on Jerome Avenue and 176th Street that was being used as a hot sheet motel. If you don't know what that is, I can translate. And also as
This is at church, you know.
I'm a preacher's kid, so and as a place for drug dealing, and we specifically targeted it because right next to that building was the step street that the kids took to go to a school up at the top of the hill. It's about leadership, it's about managing resources, it's about setting priorities for what's important for our city. The most important treasure we have is our children. We need to protect them, and we have to do everything in our power to do that.
Kadeen, first of all, Kadeen, thank you for being a leader already and for being a great example to young men and women around you. Thank you. We should give him an applause. Two answers to your question. One, when you've got an organization with over 34,000 uniform officers, there's always choices you can make. There's always some redeployments that you can do. There's always a question of how you use overtime and a lot of other tools of management. The notion that right now we're leaving so many young people without the support they need after school, and we all know what happens in the moments after school. We all know that for young people, it's the hours right after school, typically from 3 to 6 p.m. are the most dangerous, difficult times of the day. And we've got to address it proactively by having a police presence. I think it's part of a bigger effort to get more and more police to the beats, to places where people actually are so they can see and feel that presence and develop relationships with individual officers. That's one part. But the second part is let's help keep as many kids in the school building with a real devotion to after-school programs so kids are on the right path and able to learn more and able to be stronger. That to me, and I've said, and I challenge my colleagues up on stage to match this, I've said we should tax the wealthiest New Yorkers so we can have after-school programs for every middle school student in New York City who needs it. So they will be safer, so they will learn, so they will succeed. Both those approaches are needed if we want to make your walk home safer and that for kids all over the city.
Kadeen, it is very important that the next mayor look at how the CompStat program works. The beauty of CompStat and why it was originally put together was it was supposed to identify areas of crime and deploy and redeploy police officers to those areas of crime. It's not about quotas, about the number of cops that you have in each and every precinct. You need to be able to use the New York City Police Department in a way to reduce crime. We need to do that here in New York, and it's not happening the way it used to happen. Talk about 1,000 police officers down in Lower Manhattan. How about the number of police officers who are in Times Square protecting all the tourists? We need to protect the people in the city of New York who live here. We need to deploy them in a way that brings them back into the community. I'm in favor, as I think everybody else was up here, about the fact that we need more police officers. We need to get more police officers, and we need to put them in the boroughs. The boroughs outside of Manhattan. It is critical that we do that. And listen, I'll stipulate to the number at $70 million. I don't think that does include the pension, but nonetheless, at $70 million, that's 0.1% of the entire city budget. You can't tell me we can't find 0.1% for 1,000 cops. It is very possible to do. You take the Mayoral items, which is about $400 million, we could end up with a whole lot more cops, almost 5,000 for doing something like that. So what I think is really important is that we need to have a mayor and a police commissioner who wants to deploy the police officers in a way that provides the community to be safer.
Kadeen, It is, we have to make sure that you can get to and from school safely. That's our obligation. As we talk about, and all of us in a number of ways have talked about increasing police officers, and I definitely have. We need to make sure, again, that those officers are out there on the ground, that they know who and what to look for, that they're in the neighborhoods, that we provide safe corridors, and it's making shifts during the tour to make sure that those corridors are protected. You're not the only one, and you know that. There's so many other young people out there who are trying to do the right thing, who are trying to go to school, who are being beaten up, who are being forced to join gangs, because if not, they get beaten up again and again and again. We know what's going on. We have to make sure that that stops. We have to provide those safe corridors so you can go about and do the things that you need to do, and so many of our young people who want to succeed, who want to do the right thing, are able to do that. So that's our obligation. We have to make sure that we do that for you and the other young people like you who are trying to do the right thing, who don't get attention in the newspapers. Only when you do something wrong do you get the attention. So you're one of the many, one of the majority who are doing the right thing, who we need to make sure that the streets are safe for you, which is why we need to add police officers, which is why we need to provide environments for you that are going to be safe. Absolutely.
Kadeem, I want to add to what folks have said, to also thank you for reporting what happened to you.
Yes.
Because too many New Yorkers are victims of crime. Before I was on the council, I ran a crime victims assistance agency, and they don't call the police. It is an act of absolute bravery to report when you are a victim of a crime, and I want to thank you for doing that. Because if you didn't do that, you would never know what had happened. It wouldn't become part of what we have to focus on. So I want to thank you so much for doing that and say it is just unacceptable it happened to you, but worse, that it took so long for the police to respond and that they responded in a way that was clearly not satisfactory. So one of the points that we're all talking about is how do we expand the number of police officers around schools. But we also have to listen to the second part of your question and do better training about what police officers are required to do when they respond to a crime, to make sure they're actually being as aggressive as they can to go find the individuals who committed the crime. Now, we can increase police officers around schools. We should do it in a way targeting the corridors that have the most crime. Great individuals like yourself are helping us know where that is. We can do that through some of the strategies we've already discussed around better management of overtime, increasing civilianization. Every year in the budget, we in the council put money in to increase civilianization. That saves us money in the long run. That will give us more police officers. But we can also, in addition to the police officers out there, which I believe we can fund, we should increase our public-private partnerships in these areas. And let me give you two examples. We had a problem a couple summers ago of a real rash of hate crimes targeting the Mexican community on the North Shore of Staten Island. And it wasn't on a corridor around a school, but it was on a business corridor. So we in the council got a community foundation, the Richmond Savings Bank, to give us a grant, and we got cameras for all of the businesses on that part of Staten Island. So people knew that they had to stop doing those hate crimes because there were now cameras watching. We also expanded community services in that area to give resources for people. In the Bronx, a number of years ago, there was a horrible gang attack, a torturous gang attack. And when I stood outside the building where it happened, I stood in front of the building where it happened, across from the school. And the principal came out and said, I've been saying for years we needed to do something about this building, and I was particularly concerned, she said, because my children play in this street because our schoolyard isn't done. We got Coca-Cola to give us money to finish that schoolyard, build a community garden, and redo the recreation center in that area. So it's police, it's surveillance cameras, it's more community facilities, and it's bringing all the resources to make the team as big and strong as we can, fighting crime with a particular focus around keeping young people safe. Because if you can't go to and from your school without being worried you're going to get assaulted, how can you possibly focus when you are in that school? And Billy's right, it's our job as mayor, to make those streets safe.
Can
It goes back to communications, what I said before, that the schools, the community, and the police department have to work all together and schedule police officers to be able to protect our kids going back and forth. And it just comes down to that simple communications and getting that done.
Okay, can you, whoever is the next mayor, you have to, also?
I'm sorry. Just real quick, I want to thank those whole team. I partially agree with all my colleagues up here that there have to be officers assigned to these routes that kids take home from school. Jenny and I are always worried about children being at school as well. But you know, it's not just about the police. It's also about what's happening inside the school. Because in many cases, kids are attacked going home from school from kids inside the school. And we have seen too many instances of attacks, kids on kids, and the Department of Education does not do anything about it. Their attitude still is, kids will be kids. What can we do about it? Under their own guidelines, the Chancellor's guidelines, they're supposed to keep track of these kinds of incidents. And yet my audits have shown that the department does not even comply with their own Chancellor's regulations in keeping track of it. When they are able to keep track of the bias and harassment incidents occurring inside the schools, I bet you they can easily deploy better police resources outside the schools so that kids can get home safely after school. But I also want to say something about, I've been dying to say this since the question of Ray Kelly was asked. I would not keep the same commissioner. I would actually get all new people all around. And in fairness to Ray Kelly, I'm not sure that anybody's actually asked him if he wanted to stay beyond his 12 years in the current term. But it is not just about the commissioner. It's about the top ranks of chiefs inside the entire department. Those ranks have to be changed completely.
It's a school safety question. Okay, fair enough. Whoever the next mayor is sitting up here, and you got them all to agree to something you wanted, so it was a pretty good night's work.
Let me, on behalf of Metro IAF, thank Aaron Lewis for being such a fabulous partner. We are a relational organization, and we appreciate the partnership of the New York Daily News. Thank you for partnering with us to sponsor these forums. I'd like to thank the questioners, our citizen leaders who made it real for us tonight. And I'd like to thank the candidates. For tonight, we know what you think and what your positions are. Thank you for being honest. Let me inform you that while the Daily News endorses, Metro IF will not endorse any of you. We promise to work with you if elected. And in the fall of this year, when the field is narrowed down, we will be talking with two of you again. We want to remind you that this is not your New York. It is our New York. We will hold you accountable. Good night and God bless you.